Hello and a very warm welcome, viewers. You're watching the brand new edition of The Big Picture with your host, Kriti Mishra. The powerful cyclone Tauktae battered the western coast. The cyclone is currently classified as an extremely severe cyclonic storm and is the fifth strongest cyclone ever recorded in history of the Arabian Sea. At a time when India is battling a massive spread of COVID-19 pandemic, the cyclone storm has unleashed a double-edged sword to people in the western coastal areas. The IMD categorizes tropical storms which rotate in an anti-clockwise direction into depression, deep depression, cyclonic storm, severe cyclonic storm, very severe cyclonic storm, extremely severe cyclonic storm, and super cyclonic storm. Cyclones occur in the pre-monsoon months of May and June and the post-monsoon months of October and November. India has faced 170 storm since 1970, which is the fourth highest after the United States of America, Philippines, and China in the same duration. And to analyze this increasing incidence of severe cyclones, I'm joined by Mr. Dushmanta Ranjan Patnaik, Scientist F, Head Numerical Weather Prediction IMD, and Mr. Saurabh Bharadwaj, Fellow and Area Convener, Center for Climate Modeling, the Energy and Resources Institute. Welcome to Rajya Sabha Television, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And Mr. Patnaik, if I may begin the show with you, India faced 3 cyclones in 2017, 7 in 2018, 8 in 2019, and 5 in 2020. Together, they have killed more than 500 people near India's coastlines. Your take on the changing trend in cyclone frequency and the intensity, sir?
Yeah. Thank you. So coming to the cyclone over the North Indian Ocean, generally we get 5 cyclones on average in a year. That is 4 on the Bay of Bengal and 1 in the Arabian Sea. This is the normal frequency. But recently, few years, as you already mentioned, 2017, 18, 19, there are some number of cyclones are more during this, based on the average 5. But when we see the long-term trend of North Indian Ocean cyclonic frequency, that means depression, cyclone, all categorized in one category, then there is actually a decreasing trend in the monsoon season as well as in the post-monsoon season. But coming to the Arabian Sea in particular, when we see the last 30 years from 1990 onwards, there is a significant increasing trend of extremely severe cyclone storm. So that is one point that is very clearly noticed. And as a result, Arabian Sea, the more intense cyclones nowadays we are getting, and that is causing a lot of devastation over the western coast of India. And not only the Arabian Sea, even the Bay of Bengal also we have witnessed many severe cyclones in the recent times. That you remember, people have remembered last year the Amphan super cyclone. Okay, so and also there are many Bulbul cyclone, Fani cyclone, all these things cyclone that is also affecting Bay of Bengal. But in general, 5 cyclones in a year on average. But yes, there is certain decreasing trend on North Indian Ocean for an annual frequency. But Arabian Sea, we have noticed some increasing frequency of the extreme severe cyclonic storm. So that is a point that can be related to the climate change.
All right, so that's a very important point you're making, sir, and I'll just seek explanation on that, on the difference between Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea. But before that, Mr. Bharadwaj, historically, scientists who study climate change have been reluctant to say that a storm or a hurricane is caused by climate change. But now that seems to have drastically changed. Why has that happened?
Right. So first of all, thank you, Kriti, for inviting me on this important discussion. So as my colleague, Dr. Patnaik, rightly put that, the increasing frequencies over Arabian Sea is what that is factually correct as well. And we are seeing that. Now, the reluctance that you were talking about earlier due to climate change is the question of attribute. Whenever any extreme event occurs, scientists always have to attribute it, or people ask whether it's due to climate change or not. So the reason for, or the question of attribution becomes very important. And the question of attribution is answered once we have a lot of data sets and more, I would say, if I may use the word faith in our projections or in our models. Now our models have been increasing in its strength, in its efficacy, in its understanding tremendously in the past 10 to 15 years. So we have more evidences, we have more knowledge, we have more faith in the kind of science that we are generating, and the Ministry of Earth Sciences, the kind of inputs and the data that they are giving to the people. And that's why it becomes more evidence-based analysis and evidence-based outputs that we generate. And we try to link it in a much robust manner towards the existing global warming that we are seeing. Let me put a very important stat in front of you that we all know about global warming. Now, global warming or climate change with its global externalities has a very regional impact, right? And it has been assessed and published that that oceans absorb 90% of the excess warming that we are facing in the globe today. And specifically, Indian Ocean has been warming the highest of all the oceans compared to. And that's why, and this in Indian Ocean has specific basins, Arabian Sea, Arabian Basin, Bay of Bengal Basin, North Indian Ocean Basin, which of course are then resulting it's giving a kind of a warm pool region that Arabian Sea never had before, but now slowly and surely it's rising in its temperature, and because of the absorption that the Indian Ocean has done, the whole Indian Ocean as such has done of the global warming, and hence giving conducive environment for cyclogenesis or generation of these cyclones.
Okay, all right. Okay, we'll just understand that in just a bit. But before that, Dr. Patnaik, you were telling us something very important about Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea. Now, we understand that for every 4 cyclones in the Bay of Bengal, there is one in the Arabian Sea. We have data for more than 150 to 200 years. Help us understand the reason for this major difference between the number of cyclonic storms on the eastern and western shores of India.
Yeah, so that is very important question. So if we see the geographical location, the Bay of Bengal and the Arabian Sea, so if you see the cyclonic storm, more cyclones are formed over the northwestern Pacific. On global scale, the Northwest Pacific, the South China Sea, they are the region. That's why number of cyclones are 70 to 80% of the annual cyclone. Okay, so from what happened, the number of cyclones that form over the Northwest Pacific, quite out of that, it enters into the Bay of Bengal as a remnant, the remnant of the system. When it moves to the western side, it enters to the Bay of Bengal as a remnant. So some of the remnants again further intensify in the Bay of Bengal. So there are, that means one, remnants, it comes from the Western Pacific. Also the in situ generation, just like in Arabian Sea in situ generation. So Bay of Bengal also in situ generation because of high temperature, the verticity, that means the cyclogenesis region, ITCZ. So that already favorable conditions prevail over the Bay of Bengal. That's why in situ generation of cyclonic storms are there over the North Indian Ocean. That means start from Andaman Sea. But some of them also come from the Western Pacific. Whereas when we come to the Arabian Sea, that part is not there. So mostly it is the in situ generation over the Arabian Sea because it is not coming from the eastern side. Of course, some cyclones when formed over the Bay of Bengal, it can also enter to the Arabian Sea, but that number is very less. So that is the reason we get more number of cyclone over the Bay of Bengal, that is 4 on average, and whereas in Arabian Sea, 1 on average.
All right, so that explains the difference. But Mr. Bharadwaj, since we were talking about climate change, now globally, ocean temperatures have increased as a result of climate change, and there has been a global increase in the intensity of the strongest storms over recent decades. Help us understand, how do warm seas make cyclones more powerful?
Okay. So basically, the tropical Indian Ocean right now, it has seen a rapid SST warming with an average rise of say around 1 degree centigrade in the entire 100 years. So that amounts to around a 0.15 degree per decade during the last 50 or 60 years, from 51 to 2015. And this is a little bit higher than the global average sea surface temperature that has increased, which has been around 0.7 degrees. with a trend of around 0.11 degrees per decade. So you see the Indian Ocean region have been warming very rapidly. And to put it in a very simpler language, basically the warm energy to a disturbance. So when Dr. Patnaik just said that some kind of remnants are coming as a low pressure area from Pacific crossing the Indonesia coastlines and all, and coming into the Arabian Sea, into Bay of Bengal. Now, to make it more stronger, it needs a higher energy, and warm oceans provide that energy. There would be there would be vertical winds. The vertical wind shear would help that. The steric effect would help. The top layers of ocean would what kind of temperature, what kind of salinity is there would be conducive for that. And once a cyclone is forming, when it is getting all the main ingredients for it to have a higher intensity, it takes the energy, keeps on taking the energy from the ocean below, which is much warmer. Now, when it takes and it builds itself, it tends to then do a landfall somewhere, right? So it tends to become important. It tends to become very stronger. What have been seeing, and probably we can talk more on this as well, that now we are also seeing something which is that more number of cyclones are forming in particular places. So that is also these warm high sea surface temperature are basically helping more number of cyclone generation as well. Not only the cyclones that are forming that are very intense, but also sometimes they are regular periodic cyclones, like you say in the last 5 years, many number of cyclones, much more than the last 50 years have formed. The trend is very high, and as IMD has put it, around 11% more in the last decade and around 32% in the last 5 years itself. So that's the reason why these cyclones become very powerful when they find a very warm pool existing or a higher sea surface temperature existing for them.
All right. Yeah. So since we are also talking about the trends and the intensity, Dr. Patnaik, we are already witnessing a detectable increase in post-monsoon tropical cyclones over the Arabian Sea. Are we also moving towards such a trend during the pre-monsoon session as well?
Yeah, one analysis we have to understand that pre-monsoon cyclone frequency is less compared to post-monsoon. Okay, so that's what, if we exclusively separate out the pre-monsoon and also the separate out the ocean basin, then number is very less. That's why the trend analysis may not give a very good interpretation when the frequency is very small. But so that is not like whether Western Pacific, that area where the number of frequency cyclone storms are very high. So here, Arabian, that's with respect to trend analysis, consistently one significant difference or significant trend what we can see from the data is that Arabian Sea in general is producing more intense cyclone in recent time. Again, it is not that pre-monsoon or post-monsoon, because the frequency is very small. Only one cyclone on average, so that is quite very less in number. That's why it is very difficult to separate out the pre-monsoon and post-monsoon only over the Arabian Sea. But in general, over the Arabian Sea, we are getting the intense cyclone more in number in recent time.
All right. So since there are cyclones, there has to be a mitigation strategy as well. Mr. Bharadwaj, India has 7 established cyclone warning centers covering its eastern and western coasts. Government of India has also initiated the National Cyclone Risk Mitigation Project with a view to address cyclone risks in the country. In the next 10 years, what should be our strategy?
Right. So, firstly, I'm very even glad to. I was very glad to see when the government of India has done a concerted efforts towards building these scientific establishments, these task forces, particularly with an aim for combating the effects of climate change. And cyclones extremes are just one part of these extremes, right? So like you mentioned about NCRMP, the National cyclone risk mitigation plan or project, which basically talks about improved early warning systems and then enhancing local capacities and improving emergency shelters and strengthening the DRM, the disaster risk management strategies. But then it's very important that we decentralize them as well. It's very important that we think about these risks as systemic risks. Like let's talk about what is happening. We are, and you rightly mentioned, we are facing a dual-edged sword with COVID around and with such extremes occurring. We also saw this last year as well. So what we talk about is compounding risks that we are facing and we will continue to face. So do we have a multi-hazard disaster management strategy in place? So it's important for us to look towards assessing those first, whether such risks, these compounding and cascading impacts of these compounding risks are incorporated in such multi-hazard strategies. Once we do that, we also tend to involve every I would say kind of stakeholders, right? From vulnerable communities at the ground to public to private. So these partnerships is one of the ways in which we can enhance these mitigation actions on the ground, because these plans has to be implementable on the ground, right? And these plans, for them to be implementable, they have to be made with a shareable vision. It has to have a vision for everyone on board, right? It needs to be scalable. It needs to be implementable as well, right? And it has to develop with a shareable vision. Another thing that we can help improve is the inclusion of nature-based solutions. We have heard about mangroves and sand dunes being the natural defense mechanisms. So more focus on such. We have lost most of them, but then it's point, and nothing will be done in a quick way, in 1 day or 2 days. It's a long process. So the time for us is to look upon these, focus upon these solutions now, so as to be, and also absorb success stories from different countries like Japan and other coastal islands, how they have coped up, how their traditional knowledge have helped them. So bringing those kind of knowledge on board in the along with these technological solutions that are being designed and envisaged in the plans.
All right, so you're making a very imperative point there about being implementable and scalable, and also about best global practices. Let me understand it from Dr. Patnaik. Dr. Patnaik, what are the best global practices that India could introduce to mitigate such disasters?
Yeah. So first of all, IMD is taking under the leadership of Ministry of Earth Science many initiatives. Just earlier we are only focusing on the forecasting of the tropical cyclone. That's all. That because our role was very limited. But nowadays it is a multi-hazard warning. Because example, suppose there is cyclone storm. So the cyclone storm, it can cause damage due to the rainfall. It can cause damage due to the wind speed. It can cause damage due to the storm surge, coastal area, and also if it is entering to some hilly region, it can cause some landslide also. That means one disaster can cause lot of damages with respect to, that's why we are focusing on multi-hazard warning, and our main focus is now impact-based forecasting. That means how much damage this system will do. It is not that only forecast. Yes. What it will do, that is also point. That means that's why now the vulnerability analysis, risk, that is also more important, because which are the structure, whether this structure can sustain this much wind or not. So all these data need to the IMD role, and actually recently under the initiative of the Ministry of Earth Science, several steps we have taken. We have improved our observational network, radar, satellite, sophisticated models are there for producing the good forecast. Besides that, this is dissemination to the last mile users so that they will get the forecast. In addition to that, since we are this is a multi-hazard warning, means like one system can cause several type of damages like rainfall, wind speed, the landslide, storm surge, many things it can cause. So we are focusing on multi-hazard prone, and our role is now to give a proper impact-based forecasting. That means that is the impact-based forecasting means it is not only that the cyclone is going to hit over this coast 20 kilometers south of this or south of that, but how much strong wind will be there, what are the damages potential it has, so to all structure, that is now our focus, and we have already done for cyclone case. Now also the other disaster like heavy rainfall and other heat wave also, we are focusing on multi-hazard warning cases, means impact based forecasting, so that what are the impacts that will have due to this adverse weather, and we are working on that. But it is not that the role of IMD limit will be there. Yes, there are some state government, we need a lot of geospatial data, vulnerability analysis, all these things are required, and we are working closely with all the NDMA and state disaster management authority and all this center state government, and we are progressing well, and hopefully in near future our forecast will further improve with respect to the impact based forecast.
Absolutely, sir. We have to consistently work on improving our forecasting techniques. But before we end this conversation, Mr. Bharadwaj, I'd also like to understand, besides cyclone, what is the impact of climate change in terms of intensity, frequency, and extent of extreme other weather events?
All right. So that's a very important question. And like I even alluded to earlier, that cyclones are just one cog in the wheel. There are many. And you would also see that happening in India. And you have seen that happening in last year as well, the heat wave events and extreme rainfall events. Now, these not only have primary effects, these are not just the primary events, but they also have a cascading impacts, like we say secondary impact events. There are sudden events, and then there are some which are long-term events. Now, we know due to climate change and global warming, our ambient temperature is slowly and gradually rising. However, regionally and locally, what we are seeing is that the local extremes are rising. Like we see a lot of days having extreme rainfall and followed by a lot of days having no rainfall at all, right? So you on over a particular area, not only you have drought-like drought-like conditions, but also flood-like conditions. Specifically, with urbanization, we find a lot of stresses on the cities and urban centers. So the climate change is evolving itself much fiercely onto the regional scales and local scales with respect to higher extremes, with respect to temperature, warm days, very warm days, heat waves, and rainfall, like very rainfall days, which may give rise to flooding events. What Dr. Patnaik also mentioned about landslides in a hilly area, cloudbursts. Now, we have such kind of data available with us. We have science that is available with us. What we need right now is to customize this data, demystify this data, and integrate it with the local adaptation planning. And specifically coming back to cyclones, which also connects to the other extreme events, not only lives are lost, India has done tremendously well in saving the lives, but the property loss will keep on increasing because we have more to destroy. The extremes have more to destroy, and we cannot stop our urbanization and development. So we should think more focused towards disaster resilience infrastructure, climate resilient infrastructure mechanisms, and government has been doing that. In 2019, Prime Minister Modi started with this coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure. It's a brilliant step forward. It not only brings together a common vision, shared vision of everyone around, but build a framework on which everyone can actually act on, can apply to different sectors, as well as can scale to different locales as well. So climate change, I understand climate change as we should avoid the unmanageable and manage what is unavoidable. So we have to we have to integrate and mainstream such kind of frameworks even locally if we need to actually save a lot of grounds on livelihoods and safeguard their future.
Right, that's a very important point that you're making. Dr. Patnaik, you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, because what Dr. Bharadwaj has mentioned very correctly, that means it is the extreme weathers are increasing, and disaster management is means that is the, because we cannot avoid the disaster, that natural disaster is going to come. So how we can manage this disaster, and by early warning or the other mechanism, disseminations, and also the disaster resilience infrastructure. That is also a long-term planning that also need to be done, because we can save the life, but how to save the property? The life is more important, but at the same time, the property also, if we can do by some resilient measure, that what Prime Minister has taken initiative, and that also we should focus on that part. And in that process only we can manage the disasters.
All right, so you made a very important point, sir, while we are closing the show, that we cannot avert the disasters, but we have to be prepared, we have to be resilient. On that note, thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Bharadwaj and Dr. Patnaik.
Thank you.
Well, viewers, that's all we have in this edition of The Big Picture. Thanks for watching, stay tuned and take good care.